All good things come in two. 2 heads, Happy Gilmore films, and 2 weeks in a row of creating Scovillain decks because after last week's crazy wheel spin, the spotlighted Pokemon this week is Scovillain's pre-evolution Capsakid. The stakes to ensure this week's deck as a meta champion is high. After Scovillain fell apart at the finish line last week, let's see if we can get Capsakid to reverse the current 2-week losing streak and avoid being a Veluza loser. This is the 825 Deck Challenge. So things are a bit different this week, as I decided to double down and go all or nothing on an iteration of last week's deck. But it is different in one major way. Of course, it still features Capsakid, as well as Scovillain EX, the fire type, though he's technically grass as well due to his ability, and the Centiskorch line. Centiskorch's attack does 130 damage to the active Pokemon for 1 fire energy, and then does 30 damage to your benched Pokemon. In most cases, you don't want any additional damage on your Pokemon, but in this case, damage on the bench is good, because Scovillain EX's attack, Spicy Rage, does 10 plus 70 damage for each damage counter placed on it. So a Scovillain with 30 damage done would do 220 damage, not accounting for weakness or resistance, with its damage numbers only going up. Last week I ran Rapidash and Chandelure, both to help with hand draw, but also Chandelure as an additional attacker. However, I didn't feel like I was getting the damage onto my Capsakids and Scovillains consistently enough for Scovillain to ever really have the damage output I wanted. So Chandelure and Rapidash hit the rapid trash, and I upped the Centiskorch Sizzlipede line to 3 of each instead of 2 to prioritize him as an early game attacker. My secret weapon, and what's different this week in the deck, was the Dunsparce line for its Runaway Draw ability, which when activated lets me draw 3 cards from the top of my deck and then shuffle in Dunsparce into Dunsparce along with anything attached back into my deck. I ran 3 of these Dudunsparces with a Dudunsparce EX as a 1 energy powerhouse to help if I get cornerstoned. The Dudunsparce was a great include here, because in a world where Centiskorch attacks and the Dunsparces on my bench get 30 damage placed on them, the damage doesn't super matter, because next turn if they evolve up and Runaway Draw, that damage is essentially removed from the board. On the trainer side of the house, the deck was pretty similar still, with Team Rocket's Venture Bomb and Mela as my less common but super beneficial includes. With better hand draw, I did drop the Lucky Helmet and an Air Balloon in place of some Gust Up in the form of Counter Catcher and Boss's Order. And with that, the deck felt tighter, and it was time to see how it played. My first matchup led to a near instant concede for my opponent when they saw the typing matchup, as my fire deck would have done double damage to his metal deck. My second match was a lot more real, as I'd be facing up against the King of Thunder himself, Raging Bolt. I started on turn 1 with Dudunsparce and Sizzlipede in hand, as well as Centiskorch, Artazon, and Energy. I put Dunsparce into active in error, and was unable to change it. I love that live doesn't let you change it as soon as you put it down. So I hoped that I'd get a Dudunsparce early to pull it away, and then get my Centiskorch swinging and self-damaging. I drew into another Dunsparce and then Artazon to get a Capsakid out, attached an energy to my Sizzlipede, and passed. My opponent did their turn 2 Raging Bolt thing, getting a lot of Pokemon out, but not a ton of energy in this case. Ionoing as well, but I was very lucky and drew into another Centiskorch, meaning the Iono actually benefited me. On my go, with Hilda in hand, I grabbed an Energy and a Dunsparce to get my 3-card bonus and get the newly evolved Centiskorch into active. The Runaway Draw gave me a Scovillain and a Buddy-Buddy. I intentionally opted to not overset up my bench though, as I knew I'd be self-damaging and I had no reason to have 3 40 HP Dunsparces on my bench. As I swung, I knocked out the active Hoot and self-damaged. On my opponent's next turn, they were still stalled out, with not a lot of energy making it to the board, and even worse for them, seemingly no supporters. I was expecting Centiskorch to be KO'd, so a second turn here to increase the damage to my Scovillain enough to be able to one-hit KO Raging Bolt, even with a Bravery Charm on, was nice. I used this turn to set up even further, and the 130 damage output that Centiskorch is capable of is also nothing to scoff at. Raging Bolt finally got Raging built, and swung at my Centiskorch on their turn for the KO. I was feeling really in a good spot, as I now had Scovillain who would be able to one-shot the Raging Bolt, but my hand was down to only 3 cards, and I hadn't seen a supporter in a hot minute. so I was a little bit worried in terms of being able to be flexible here. With me being able to knock out the Raging Bolt, my opponent put up Teal Mask and did get some energy moving for a solid attack, but it didn't knock out my Scovillain, meaning on this turn, accounting for weakness, I'd be swinging for 3,360 against the Ogre Pawn. But the writing was on the wall for my opponent, and they conceded. 2 wins, but no game completions. I can tell you though, this deck was actually feeling super smooth, and I hadn't even hit into a lot of my supporters last game. It was still handling very well though. The last matchup was another Raging Bolt game. It must have been a theme, and this match was very good back and forth, with me taking an early knockout on a Hoot Hoot. They used cards like Bosses and Prime Catcher to manipulate my active 2 turns in a row and allow Raging Bolt to take out Scovillain before I could even hit with Scovillain, which left me with this board state. But I had Dunsparce EX, and that was a perfect time for him, as I could use him to get a return KO on Raging Bolt and also give me time to try to build back and leave my opponent with 0 energy on the board. But it's Raging Bolt, so on their turn, they got all of the necessary energy back on the board to return the KO onto Dunsparce EX, leaving them with 2 prizes remaining and me with 3. I had Scovillain in hand, but with no damage on it, I sent up one of my Centiskorches, but I also made 2 big brain plays here. First, I would boss up the Teal Mask for a knockout to get 2 more prizes due to weakness, but with how much gust my opponent had earlier in the match, I wanted to get in their head a little bit, and so I placed the Hero's Cape onto the active Sizzlipede to make it seem like this Sizzlipede was my last ditch effort, like maybe it was going to be impossible for me to find energy for my Scovillain. And so on their turn, they prioritized and knocked out the Centiskorch, letting me put Scovillain in active and make a very exciting final turn. I had 3 Venture Bombs in hand, and to be able to do enough damage to KO the Raging Bolt, which now had a Bravery Charm by the way, I would need one of these 3 Venture Bombs to come up tails. The first was heads, the second was the tails I needed, and I used the third as well just to get my hand down, because I'd be using Mela here, which would give me the free Fire Energy attached to Scovillain, and then let me draw up to 6, but I'd need to draw into either an Earthen Vessel, Dudunsparce for more hand draw, or energy outright to be able to attach and win. And sure enough, there was the energy I needed. The energy attached, and I was able to take down Raging Bolt and win. 3 wins, and I was feeling awesome. The deck was truly a less janky version of last week's. And so feeling great, it was time to face the final boss. A ranked match where a win would make this deck a meta champion, and a loser would dub it a Veluza loser and keep my Veluza loser streak going. To start off the final match, my opponent had a Snorunt in active. This was a Grimmsnarl Frostlass Monkey Dory deck, and with damage flying everywhere, I'd have to be really mindful of how I was using my Centiskorches here, if at all, since Frostlass's ability takes 10 damage onto Pokemon with an ability every turn, which Scovillain is a Pokemon with an ability, so I might barely even need Centiskorch. I placed an energy for turn and passed, and my opponent had a strong first turn, with a good bench setup, and then the TM Evo to get a separate Snorunt on the bench evolved up along with Morgrim, and with Spikemuth Gym as the active stadium on my opponent's next turn, they'd be able to search out any Marnie's Pokemon, and I assumed that they'd be searching out Grimmsnarl, meaning my idea of playing this a little bit slower was not going to work here. Drawing into Mela and having Arven in hand, I used a combination of TM Evo and Buddy-Buddy Poffin to get Centiskorch and Scovillain up. If my plan worked, my opponent would knock out the active Dunsparce next turn, putting an energy in discard and allowing me to Mela to get a Scovillain good. I also assumed my opponent would see the EX on the other side and use Monkey Dory to send damage over to it. To make the target look extra juicy, I put the Hero's Cape A-Spec onto Scovillain, putting it at a total of 360 HP. This was going to be a monster, and I'd hoped that they'd be putting damage on it early. The trap was set and played out almost perfectly, except the excess damage that was coming my way did not go on to my Scovillain. Instead, they put it all on the benched Capsakid right next to it. But with the Dunsparce knocked out, I wasn't out of this match. But who would I put up? Would I put up my very hurt Capsakid, or my Scovillain, whose damage was not really that high? With Air Balloon in hand, I opted to put up my now very hurt Capsakid, because with Mela, there was a chance I'd be able to get it evolved up into Scovillain. I top decked the Ultra Ball, which was a great start, decreased my hand down to 2, and with this Mela draw, I would need some path to energy, or energy itself, but nothing. I Ultra Balled away the Dudunsparce EX, as I didn't expect to see multiple EX Pokemon out at a time for my opponent, and then I also got rid of the Artazon. Watching it back, I think Adventure Bomb should have gone instead, just so I could bump Spike Move, but in the moment, the extra damage counters felt more helpful since I wasn't planning to utilize Centiskorch much this game, if at all. And with no one able to attack, I retreated my active Scovillain to put my Hero's Cape Scovillain up. And that decision didn't matter as my opponent Adrena-brained using Monkey Dory onto my bench Scovillain and then bossed him up for the KO. So I was down 3 prizes already, which wasn't great. What I had going for me is that my opponent had knocked out a Pokemon with an energy on it, so Mela was on the menu for me and I would get to attack this turn. What also was going for me was that Grimmsnarl is weak to grass and Scovillain's ability makes it both grass and fire, so the hits here were really gonna hit. 1000 perfect damage and I'm officially on the board. I started to do math here to see if the Grimmsnarl combined with a potential Monkey Dory on the other side would be able to knock me out here, but instead my opponent did a major misplay. They used Monkey Dory to go for the TMD evolution, which would have been genius had they not forgotten about the Hero's Cape that was attached to me. So with their turn pretty much tossed, this was my chance to get back in it. Ideally, I would have Arven for my counter catcher here, but my counter catcher along with my third set of Capsakid and Scovillain were all prized. So I put out everything I could to thin my deck and went for the knockout on Monkey Dory, putting us both at 3 prizes. Knocking out the monkey here was major for me, as taking out that additional 30 damage thrown my way each turn was going to make things a lot cleaner. My opponent brought up Grimmsnarl and put damage out where he could, but it was clear they were running out of Pokemon, and with 8 cards in their hand at the end of their turn, I was surprised at how little was happening. Grimmsnarl put the damage onto me, and well, I put it right back for a 4,360 damage knockout, putting me at just 1 prize card remaining and my opponent at 3 still. I had done it. I had somehow come back, and with all less than 100 HP Pokemon on the bench, I knew I could do it. And then, the stuff of nightmares. Blood Moon Ursaluna, a 260 HP, 240 damage dealing endgame monster, whose ability decreases his energy needed to attack by 1 for each prize card taken. And look, I've taken all but 1, so he was about to hit big for free. But before swinging, to really lock things up, they put down Team Rocket's Watchtower, which is preventing my Dudunsparce on the bench from runaway drawing next turn, because Team Rocket's Watchtower makes it so colorless Pokemon in play have no abilities. Which also locked up the Blood Moon Ursaluna from attacking, because it negated his ability and means that he would have needed to attach 5 energy to attack, resulting in an endgame concede for my opponent. A super strange ending to the match, but a win is a win. And I had come back and taken the match, redeeming Capsakid and Scovillain and making Capsakid a meta champion. For fun factor, I'd honestly give this deck a 10 out of 10. It's a ton of fun to play, big numbers are cool, and it's not just a one-trick pony when it absolutely could be. For flow factor, I'd give the deck a 9 out of 10. I felt like my hand was getting bricked so much last week, and this week, with the Dudunsparces and Melodraw engines, I rarely felt out of options. And for win equity, I'd give this deck an 8 out of 10. I was between a 7 and an 8 as my final win was on a technicality, but my other wins in casual were relatively decisive. That would give this deck a final score of 9 out of 10. And I actually ran this deck in paper format at my local challenge this week and went 2-2, with one of the losses being very, very close, and the other being a fumble from the start. I think the deck has a lot going for it right now, especially in the current meta matchups like Goldengo, Grimmsnarl, and Charizard EX, and honestly, I'm a little bit sad to put this deck to rest. And now, with no chance of either Capsakid or Scovillain coming up on the wheel, it feels like the end of an era, and time to see what comes next. That's right, it's your boy, Veluza, one of my channel's main characters. Veluza, how do you feel about this wheel outcome? Oh boy, we're gonna get so much Veluza next time on the 825 Deck Challenge.